When developing web applications, we're going to use a database to store information. In this movie, I'm going to show you how to get MySQL installed to be that database. Now, if you already have MySQL installed, either because you've already been developing with it or because you've taken another training course that included it, then you won't need to install it again. Just skim over this movie to make sure that you already know everything that I cover. If you prefer to use a different database, such as SQLite, Postgres, or Oracle, you can do that too, without many changes to what I'm going to show you in this tutorial. But we're going to be sticking with MySQL, and it'll be up to you to make any adaptations that you need. There are 3 steps to getting MySQL installed. The first is that we're going to download and install MySQL from the MySQL website, and I'll show you how to pick the right version that you need for your hardware and software. After that, we're going to set a default MySQL password. This is not an essential step, but it is a best practice, and I definitely recommend that you go ahead and lock down your copy of MySQL with a password. And last, we'll install the MySQL Ruby gem so that Ruby and our Ruby libraries, like Rails, will be able to talk to MySQL as fast as possible. Let's start by checking to see if we have MySQL installed. So MySQL can be accessed from the command line. We can type MySQL space -- version. -v won't work. It needs to be -- version, and that will tell us whether or not we have MySQL. It says command not found. That could mean that it's not in the path. We talked about the path earlier, but in this case, it actually is not there. If we say which MySQL, it doesn't exist. So we don't have it installed on my machine. If you got something different, then you may already have it installed and you may not need to do anything. But it does not ship by default with OS 10.6 Snow Leopard, which is what I have. So in order to get it installed, what we want to do is we want to open up Firefox, and you want to go to dev.mysql.com. That's the developer site for MySQL. On the developer zone, we want to look for downloads because we want to download MySQL. And what we want to be looking for is MySQL Community Server, which you see right here. That's the name of the freely downloadable version of MySQL. They also offer some more enterprise level versions that have more features built into them. But for the free version, we're going to use the Community Server. This version is perfectly fine for you to use not just for development, but actually for deploying as well. It's the open source version. What we want to do then is scroll down to the version that we want. But first, I want you to see this important platform support updates link. Now, if you click on this link, it'll give you all sorts of information about what platforms they support and changes to the support. The most important thing I want to highlight in the content that's behind that link is that as of February 1st, 2010, Sun has decided not to support MySQL on PowerPC Macs, such as PowerMac G4 and PowerMac G5. You can't use MySQL with that hardware. You must have a Mac with an Intel-based processor. I'm sorry to any of you out there with an older Mac. It was Sun's decision, and we're stuck with it. You'll either need to upgrade your hardware or research other database options. Now, assuming that you have an Intel Mac, you want to scroll down to find the version of MySQL that you want to install. If you scroll down here, you'll see that macOS 10 has already been selected in the platform list for us. And there are many choices. There are 3 key criteria that determine which one to choose. First is the macOS 10 version that you're running. I see 4 versions here. Here's 10.6. Scrolling down, here's 10.5, and down a little further here, scroll this page down, is 10.4. You want to find the set that's right for your operating system. So I'm using 10.6, so I'll go up here to the top. I want to be using one of these 4 right here. Next, notice that these 4 choices come in 2 formats, either compressed tar archive, which is here, or DMG archive, which is here. We want the DMG archive. That's the one that lets us launch an installer from our desktop, just like with other Mac software. The tar archive is really for installing via the command line. We're going to do it from the graphical user interface. And then last of all, you'll need to pick either 64-bit or 32-bit architecture. So here's the 64-bit, and here's the one that says 32-bit. Again, 10.6 DMG archive for both of them. So how do we pick which one? Well, if you still use macOS 10.4, then you want to pick the 32-bit. If you have an Intel Core Duo processor, pick 32-bit. Otherwise, you want to pick 64-bit. All currently shipping Macs are going to be 64-bit. So generally, 64-bit. The only exception is if you're running old operating system, 10.4, or if you're using an old Intel processor, the Core Duo processor. Let's take a look here. And it says I have the Intel Core 2 Duo. Not Core Duo, Core 2 Duo. That 2 makes a difference. The 2 indicates it's 64-bit. So if you have Intel Core 2 Duo, 64-bit. If it's just Intel Core Duo, it's the 32-bit. So because I have the Core 2 Duo, I'm going to pick the 64-bit. So I want to click this download link right here. So make sure that you get the right one. It's very important that it match your hardware. Now it wants me to fill out a form and log in, but I also have a link here that says, no thanks, just take me to the downloads. So we can skip over that process. Now we need to pick a site that's near me for the download. So I'm going to look down this list here, and this seems like Chicago, Illinois is pretty close to me. So I'm going to pick that one. What should Firefox do with it? We'll save the file. So I'll click OK. There it is. It'll download it. It's going to download it to my desktop. Yours might download it to a downloads folder or somewhere else. You'll just need to look for it so that you find it. Then you can just drag it to your desktop. Okay, now that the launch is complete, I can actually close this window, and I'll double click on the disk image. It'll open up the disk image for us so that we have an installer disk there, just as if we had a CD or something that we were going to install from. So I'll just double click on this, and what we'll see here are a couple of different things that we can install. The first one is for installing MySQL itself. So we're going to run that one first. We'll go through the steps, click all the defaults, continue, we'll accept the agreement, and then install in the default location. It's going to want our password. Again, that's the password that we use as a root password for logging into our Mac and for installing our system software. And it's going to take just about a minute while it installs. And then what we're going to do after that is we're going to install those other two packages there for the preference pane and for the startup items. Okay, installation successful. Now we want to run the startup item. It's another installer. What this does is it installs a tiny little bit that will allow MySQL to start up whenever our computer starts up. It'll just sort of auto-launch MySQL for us. So let's go ahead and run that. And that way, whenever our computer's on, MySQL is on. It's there ready for us. And then third of all, we want to click the MySQL preference pane. This will add a preference pane to our system preferences to allow us to control MySQL. We have the option to install it for this user only or for all users. I'm going to let all users have access to it. That way, anyone who happens to be using my computer logged in as someone else could also access MySQL. And you see here we are with the preference pane. We click Show All. So you see here it is down here. And now it shows us the status. Right now the server is stopped. So we can click Start. It'll want our password again. Give it 1 second. Now MySQL is running. If we want to stop it, it's the same thing in reverse. And then if we want to start it on startup or not, we can check or uncheck this box because we installed that startup item. So that does it. Now we have MySQL installed and running. Let's just close this up, and we can actually take this and eject it, and we can even throw this away into our trash as well. So now let's go into terminal and just check out the version that we have, MySQL -- version. You can see that we now have version 5.150 installed. Don't worry if yours is slightly different, that's fine. We say which MySQL now. It comes back and it tells us where it's located. Now notice it's located in user, local, MySQL, bin, MySQL. If you remember, when we did the configure Unix section, we set up the path so that that is part of the path. User, local, MySQL, bin. And that's how it's able to find that copy of MySQL. It looks in that place for it before it keeps going down the line to look in all these other folders. So just make sure if it didn't locate it, make sure that your path is correct and go back and review that movie to make sure you get it right. Now to actually launch MySQL, we can just simply type MySQL. There we are. Now we're inside MySQL. It's a command line interface that allows us to interact with this database. Say show databases with a semicolon at the end. That's the syntax for SQL. It'll show the databases that exist there right now that we have access to. Now at the moment, we're logged in as an anonymous user. We can log in as different users to the database, and different users can have access and different privileges to access different databases. The same way that we have password and user privileges to be able to use our Mac, right? So we can have different users for our Mac. Well, we also want to configure a default password for MySQL. To do that, we want to type exit. So we want to go back in this time, but we want to go back in as a specific user, MySQL-u space root. So this is going to log me in as the root user into MySQL. It looks very similar, but if we do show databases now, there's one important difference. We have an additional database here called the MySQL database. This is the master database of who is allowed to do things on the system. So if right now, without a password, anyone can log in as root, and then they have access to this database which controls all the other passwords, people potentially could log into our computer and change all the privileges for who gets to access things. So even though this is our own computer, it's a good practice to go ahead and secure that root account with a password, just to make sure that it's not wide open and that all your other password privileges then could be potentially exposed. So from inside MySQL, we do that with set password for root at localhost equals, and then password and then in parentheses and in single quotes, whatever you want your password to be. I've just got mine as secret password. Yours can be the same as your Mac installation password, or you could have something completely different. It's two separate things. This is just a password for the root account of MySQL. So let's run that. It says query OK. Again, you have to have access to this MySQL database to be able to run this. And then the last thing we want to do is flush, Privileges. Make sure you spell it correctly. Flush privileges. That will then flush out the old privileges and make sure that this new change is now in effect. Now we type exit. And now when we try and log back in as MySQL-u root, it comes up and says, nope, you don't have a password in effect. In order to put in a password, we put -p, and then it'll say, okay, tell me what that password is. And mine was secret password. See if I spelled that right. And now I'm logged in. Okay, so that secures that root account for us, and that's just a best practice step that we want to follow. Okay, so now we have MySQL installed. We have the root password set. The next thing we need to do is to install the MySQL Ruby gem. Let me just clear my screen. Now we've installed Ruby gems before. It's very simple. Remember, if you're on Mac or Linux, you'll want to do sudo in front of it, sudo gem install. And then MySQL is a MySQL gem. And up until recently, this was the MySQL gem that you would install. And it still works. However, there's a new and improved version, which is MySQL 2. And when you create a new Rails project, by default, that project is going to be expecting MySQL 2. They've made it the default gem for new Rails projects. So you'll want to install MySQL 2. There's no harm in installing both and having them both there. They'll just sit there in the gem repository and wait until they're called upon. The MySQL 2 gem is the one that Rails 3 projects will expect by default. It's going to want my password now. That's my sudo password for Mac and Linux. On a PC, you won't need to do that. This is not your MySQL password, so don't be tricked into thinking that. This is your installation password. So we'll type that in. You won't be able to see it, but we'll hit return. And then Ruby Gems will go out and download the MySQL 2 gem and install that code to allow Ruby to interface with MySQL as fast as possible. And you see it says installed native extensions. That's because it's installing something that's C code or something like that that allows it to run very, very fast. Okay, we can check and make sure that that worked by typing gem list. We'll see a list of our gems. And let's just scroll up here. And we should see one that says MySQL. There it is, MySQL 2. Now, if you have a different version than me, don't worry about that. I'm sure they're going to continue to make changes to it, and that version number will keep climbing. The main thing is to make sure that you have MySQL 2. If for any reason you have problems with the MySQL 2 gem, you can go back to the MySQL 1 gem. You'll just need to go into the gem file that's going to be in our Rails project and make sure that you tell it to expect the other gem instead. Okay, so now we have MySQL, and Ruby's able to talk to MySQL. We're ready to move on to the final pieces we'll need to be able to develop with Ruby on Rails.